Good morning. I am Hilde Movafagh, Rector of the United Methodist Seminary in Oslo, Norway. The picture here shows the midnight sun in a view for my first appointment as a pastor. But let's get straight to business. My presentation will be a description of the situation in Europe, focusing on the huge difference between Western and Eastern Europe. Towards the end, I will reflect on what might happen next in Europe in the United Methodist Church. So part one, the West and the East. In Norway, where I come from, civil ceremonies for gay or lesbian couples has been offered since 1993 by the law of partnership. Kind of let them get married, but don't call it that. This was changed in 2009 to a gender-neutral law of marriage. And from then on, there is no difference between a hetero marriage and a gay or lesbian marriage. The rights are fully the same. From 2017, gender-neutral wedding ceremonies have been offered in the Church of Norway, which is Lutheran, which opened to possibility for gay or lesbian couples to get married in church. We find the same three-stage story in the countries around us at about the same times. Denmark was the first country in the world to approve a law of partnership in 1989. I can remember that very well, even though I was only a teenager. And these couples celebrate their 30th anniversary now. Imagine your church questioning if your marriage through 30 years is valid. Netherlands, where we don't have United Methodists, but still, was the first country in the world to approve a gender-neutral law of marriage. This happened in 2001. Sweden got a gender-neutral law of marriage in 2009, and a gender-neutral liturgy was approved in the Church of Sweden, also Lutheran, the same year, immediately. The Uniting Church in Sweden, which the United Methodist Church formed with two other denominations, was inclusive from the formation in 2012. The Church of Denmark, Lutheran, have offered such a liturgy since 2012. And this brief sketch shows that Western Europe, as civil societies, have been in front in working for the rights of LGBTQ plus couples in equality of marriage. It has taken some time, but now being LGBTQ plus is normalized and generally accepted. Even though bullying does happen, LGBTQ have strong legal protection and any inequality is illegal, except in religious communities. Lesbian couples can have children through our free public health care system, but the only place lesbian parents fear their child can be bullied is in church. In our part of the world, the only resistance LGBTQ persons meet come from religious groups, Christians, Muslims, and others. Society at large is affirming, and LGBTQ people have rights to equality, both formally and in the general mind of the people. Eastern Europe is quite different. Most of the countries do not affirm LGBTQ relations. Not the Methodists, nor the Orthodox Church, which is the majority in most of the Eastern countries, not the civil society. In some of the countries, Russia, for instance, LGBTQ relations are prohibited by law, and LGBTQ persons are harassed, tortured, and even killed. They cannot be open about who they are, and they cannot enter a relation, at least not be open about it. The churches in Eastern Europe is a part of this context. They are mostly traditionalists and do not in any way approve LGBTQ relations. I have not seen that any of our churches in the East officially affirm the prohibiting laws and practices of their country, but public statements are not a habit of the Eastern Church on any issue. But I have met many United Methodists who do support the politics and practices of their country. In such a context, the Methodists do not have experiences of open LGBTQ persons near to them. They do not know by personal relation how such families can work. So what has been normalized over the past decades in the West is still strange and unfamiliar in the East. Also, the Methodists in the East are afraid of the consequences if their governments find out that their global church considers having an inclusive practice. They already struggle to be seen as a church and not a sect, and fear that this will be worse if the UMC changes its stance. Thereby, they also fear for their own security. This was an important reason for delegates from the East to vote for the traditionalist plan. Several churches have also lost their American donors due to their votes to the traditionalist plan, which makes it hard to provide for the pastor's salary, electricity bill, and other costs. This is a consequence of their votes they experience now, and this is also part of the picture. So, as you can hear, the differences in Europe are huge, and the line goes where the old Iron Curtain from the Cold War was, with just a few exceptions. It's time to have a look at the United Methodist map. You're familiar with this? Here we see central conferences in Africa. Algeria actually belonging to Southern Europe for some reason. There's the Philippines, and here's the European ones. And as you can see, my central conference, the Northern Europe and Eurasia, is by far the largest one geographically, over 10 time zones, but the smallest one in numbers. And let's see a bit more closely. In Europe, there are 3 central conferences. Let's see if this works. All right, the red one is Germany. Only a few weeks after the General Conference in February, the Executive Committee of the German Church had a meeting and stated that they would not follow the traditionalist plan, even though it was approved. This was an unanimous decision in a committee of more than 30 people. Instead, they would continue to work in a way quite equal to the One Church plan. It is not common practice in any of the central conferences in Europe to change General Conference decisions. So what we see here is something quite new. The other 2 conferences, the yellow and the apricot one, they span from east to west, which means that they include the broadness of opinions. In Central and Southern Europe, that would be the yellow one, Austria and Switzerland has a progressive or centrist majority, but the other countries are very conservative and mostly supported the traditionalist plan. France is only a tiny group of Methodists, but they also belong to the conservative side. So that would be an exception in the iron carpet image. This Central Conference has set up a study group to work on how the different countries can be connected in the future. My Central Conference spans from the coast of Norway to the border to China and Mongolia, with Vladivostok as the most eastern congregation. We have 2 areas in our Central Conference. The Eurasian part is traditionalist. The Nordic and Baltic area is more mixed. The Baltic countries are conservative. Finland also have a conservative majority, but it's more mixed. Finland is here. Denmark is largely progressive with just 2 conservative pastors. Denmark is here, and there is Norway. Norway also has a progressive majority, and we decided to go in an inclusive direction at the annual conference this summer. But we do have conservative pastors, members, and a few congregations with a conservative majority. These value the church being a counterculture, and the church being in the world, but not of the world. They do now find themselves in a weird situation where they approve the decision of the General Conference, but struggle to find their place in a Norwegian Methodist church that wants to be inclusive. So part of our decision is to work in the coming year of how our UMC in Norway will work and which room is given to the diversity of opinions. But also in this central conference, a roundtable discussion will take place, discerning what kind of connection we can have in the future. This is a parallel to the study group in the Central and Southern Conference. But this roundtable conversation is for the Nordic and Baltic area only. Eurasia has been invited and even urged to participate, but have declined. Well, this is our central conference. From Denmark, not having to deal with disagreement at all, to Russia, kind of also not having to deal with disagreement, but on the totally opposite side, where LGBTQ relations is a crime, and where there is no progressive voices in the UMC, at least not that I have heard of. So, no matter what happens in the global church, we have our own variety to deal with in our central conference. Here's an old map of the Iron Curtain that goes between Finland and Russia and the Baltic states. Here it splits Germany, and that is also an exception because Eastern Germany now belongs to Germany and is implemented in the German way of working. But other than that, the border is exactly the same. Eastern is conservative, Western more progressive. Down here is Greece and Turkey, and we don't have United Methodist there. Cultural differences in our societies are obviously one reason for the differences in the current conflict. The stance of the dominating church in the context is also important. Language is also an issue that limits access to progressive and centrist resources. From the Cold War, East and West have different values. These has been changed in the years after the curtain fell, but that also means that East and West have had quite different development. So, what will happen in Europe now? Short answer, we don't know yet. I understand that many of you have accepted that a split is the best solution, and even started dreaming of something new. Obviously, the conservative groups at both a global and American level are in the same process and have come a lot further in deciding something new. Europe is not there yet. Our aim to stay united has been expressed many times and in many contexts. We are small churches and long distances between them. A split that goes through congregations also goes through families and close networks, and it splits up an already small fellowship. A church of 20 people that splits, how is that going to work? I am not sure how many of our churches can survive such a split. But the western part of the church in all three central conferences have stated that they cannot and will not follow the traditionalist plan. And the eastern part of the church will follow nothing but the traditionalist plan. So these praises of unity is kind of weak anyway, and a split might be unavoidable. I will list a few scenarios that has been mentioned as possible ways forward. 1. Europe might change infrastructure into two central conferences, East and West. This would be culturally and administratively more relevant and would solve a few other questions as well. The two conferences could have different politics, and conservative churches in the West could even belong to the Eastern Conference somehow. This could be a part of a global rebirth of the connectional plan or something totally different. But historically, it's problematic to split Europe in East and West. Second, Europe might leave the UMC and do its own thing. We could break our relation to the UMC and instead have closer relations to other European Methodist churches, such as the British and Irish, the Nazarenes, and so on, and have our main connection in the European Methodist Council. Third, if VCA leaves USC and forms a conservative church, I assume many of the Eastern countries would follow. I am not sure how many. 4, if you, the progressive and centrist, leave and form a new Methodist church, the UMCs in Western Europe would probably look for a way of being connected to this new church. Status quo is not an option. Traditionalists accepting something like a one-church model could also be a plan of unity, but that is not also likely to happen. What is clear is that what happens in the global church does affect Europe. It is also clear that Europe has its own diversity that needs to be dealt with. Thank you.